Hello. Having failed to meet the repayments of the debts, country's debt, the Sri Lanka declared bankrupt, and now it has been trying to overcome the difficulties with the aid of IMF, which they are in the process of getting, and also they are in the process of restructuring the external and internal loans to meet the conditions of the IMF bailout. So this is all well known to the world, and but in Sri Lanka, still the leftist movement, especially the Janatha Vimukthi Permauna, still promoting the idea of Marxism Leninism as the only solution for Sri Lanka in the long run. And they don't have a short-term solution to come out of this bankruptcy. They can't reach out to any socialist countries, which in the world now there's only one, which is North Korea, and they can reach out to Kim Jong-un, who is the son of Kim Jong-il, who was actually, when he passed away, it was the JVP, the only party in the Southeast Asia who hailed Kim Jong-il as a great leader. And they published an official statement hailing him as adulating him as one of the greatest leaders in the world. That is the extent of their, if you like, imbecility, political imbecility, to adulate a heinous dictator and a murderer as a hero. But putting that aside, JVP is now playing a different game. It's not a different game, the same game that they used to do. Basically, until the 1st of January 1983, the internet came into existence, and then followed by in 2004 Facebook, and then in 2005 the YouTube. JVP had big propaganda among the Sinhala-speaking people, because the people who don't unfortunately read or learn from English sources, they don't come to know the truth. Even now it is happening. So if you look at the Janatha Vimukthi Permauna, it is a 58 years old party. That means they have been in the Sri Lankan politics 58 years, but they don't admit this. They simply say, when they refer to Sri Lanka, they refer to a 74 years old history, but they forget that out of that 58 years they were in politics, and they launched 2 failed revolutions and killed a lot of people to make Sri Lanka socialist, Marxist Leninist state. The JVP's principle is basically the fundamental principle of JVP. No one should forget that they are Marxist Leninist. In their headquarters, they sport the big portraits of Marx and Lenin, and that is what the doctrine and the economic principles they believe in. Now let us analyze and see what it is all about. Now, when they formed the party in 1965, they declared that JVP is more Buddhist than Marxist. Now, it was itself a big deception, and nobody questioned this. The media was silent, and unfortunately the media is not actually really ignorant. They don't question they don't raise the correct questions. Now, for example, Buddhism is an idealistic philosophy, whereas Marxism is a materialistic philosophy. So they are opposed to each other, diametrically opposed to each other, and cannot any party or anybody cannot be more Buddhist than Marxist or more Marxist than Buddhist. They don't mix together. So this is itself a deception, and this was aimed at winning the hearts and souls of Buddhists Sinhalese Buddhist. Now Vijayveera, who is the founder of the JVP himself, basically didn't like his name Janatha, and because his name was Patabandige Don Janatha Vijayveera and Nandasiri Vijayveera, and he didn't like Nandasiri, he didn't like Janatha, so he acquired a name which is Rohana. Rohana means south. So he wanted to emphasize that he is a Sinhalese Buddhist from south. And then also in the initial stages of JVP, in their May Day, they carried the Sri Lanka's most nationalistic person, the Anagarika Dharmapala, and his portrait along with Marx and Lenin and Engels portraits. So that was their beginning. But then they slowly sort of didn't talk much about Anagarika after that. But however, this party, very vociferous, they have big orators, and they keep on talking. They can talk 3, 4, 5 hours like Fidel Castro did. Now we'll come to that now. Now their principle still remains Marxism. Now if you look at the first Marxist state, the Socialist State in the Russia, and it became a Soviet Union later on, where I studied 11 years, and from 1970 to 83, and I have seen how the Soviet Union was going towards a total collapse. And anyway, when Lenin started the revolution and captured power through a bloody revolution in 1917, he prohibited by law private property, private ownership. So no one could own any land, any farm, any industry or anything like that. So in 1917, everything was nationalized. So it was the people have to, like farmers, have to hand over part of their better part of their harvest to the government. So the Bolshevik party, Lenin's party, appointed commissars, the people who went from farm to farm, factory to factory, and collected all the production, and then only left a little bit for the producers to use for their own personal needs, and everything belonged to the government. Factories were, the shops were closed, markets were closed, and nothing had private ownership. So, and then Lenin was busy, having captured the power, Lenin was busy in Kremlin trying to electrify the country, because the country was in dire need of electrical power. So he was having big plans, which actually very good plans, and he implemented it, and the country was electrified. But while doing that, he didn't know what's happening within the country. So after 5 years, in 1921-22, the people who brought him to power was on the street, fighting against him, fighting against his government. And he was really surprised, and he was wondering why the people who were prepared to give their lives to bring socialism to Russia and now on the street fighting against the same government. So then he realized, with the abolition of private ownership, people's interest in production have sort of vanished, and now the production has gone down, because the person who owned a farm would not have the motivation to improve the production, because anything they produced, even if they multiplied the harvest 2-3 times, everything goes to the government. So what Lenin did, he realized that socialism was a myth. He realized that it was actually a Marxist philosophical, Marxist economic principles were myths. So, but he could not tell this openly. So what he did was, he wanted to find a solution. He found a solution in a very tricky way. He introduced a new policy called New Economic Policy. Now what this new economic policy did was to reinstate private ownership of the means of production and services. So he let the farmers to open their markets, the shops were open, factories opened, and the private ownership was legalized. And after that, the production increased, and there was no starvation, and ample of food production happening, and the country started to develop. But it's a different story when Stalin came into power. He actually banned the new economic policy, and that's basically the end of the story. And had it been had Stalin continued Lenin's national the new economic policy, the NEP, the Russia would have been in a better place. Soviet Union would have been in a better place, and it would have been a market economy, very powerful nation. Unfortunately, the Marxism, Leninism, and the dictatorship of proletariat and lack of democracy, because the fundamental of socialism, the fundamental principle of socialism, is the dictatorship of the working class. So the dictatorship and democracy cannot go together. JVP, the Janatha Vimukthi Permauna in Sri Lanka, neither JVP nor any of the leftist parties would tell the truth, because parliamentary democracy cannot bring socialism. Because for socialism you need a dictatorship, because you had to capture and acquire people's private properties, private ownership on the means of production, and it should belong to the government. So this is the disaster that happened in the Soviet Union, and finally it collapsed. And the Soviet Union was basically, it consisted of 15 republics. It became independent republics, 15 countries, and the whole socialist bloc. In the end, about 1 billion throughout the world, a lot of people basically suffered quite a long time. But in case of Russia, the suffering was from 1917 to 1991. But if you take Cuba, Cuba suffered 59 years, and only in 2000 that Castro realized that Marxism, Leninism, and socialism basically were myths, and he could not develop the country according to those economic principles. So he actually, in 2005, he contacted Canada, and Canada has a scheme where they will support and help other countries, not with cash but with education. So he approached Canada, and then approached the through the Canadian system, he approached the Carlton University Professor Archibald Ritter to come to Cuba to change the curriculum of the Havana University's Faculty of Economics. So what happened was, after 1991, when the the Soviet Union collapsed, Cuba was in a big mess, and they didn't have money. The economy will not move. People could have no money, and they could not pay the wages. So Fidel Castro invited some economic advisors who were graduates from the Havana University, from the economics faculty of the Havana University, but they could not advise him, and he asked questions and they could not answer his questions. So he realized the mistake, so he wanted to correct it. So that is why he approached Canada and then changed the curriculum. So the previous socialist minded, socialist principle trained and brainwashed economic academics didn't know anything about market economy. They could not advise on taxation, they could not advise on share market and entrepreneurships, nothing. So because of that, Castro decided to change it. So he changed it, and of course before he died he did that. And in 2000, Cuba let about 1 million people out of their jobs. So they sacked the government servants because everything belonged to the government, and the government could not pay wages to these people. And they said, now in order to save, I mean, they did it in a very tricky way, deceptive way, and they said, in order to save the revolution, They told the people, now you guys have to now find your own way to make your own means and fend for yourself for your salaries. And on the government part, they said, okay, we'll give you loans, interest-free loans. There's no time period to pay back. Use that money and organize your own industry, small industries in your houses. So Cuba allowed people to hire other people and use their houses to do different things. Like some people organize shoe repair shops, some people organize the sewing organize sewing machines in the front of their house to stitch clothes and make clothes and stuff like that. And then some people organize little restaurants, and you could still see there. I went there in 2019, and you could see that. And I went with my wife and my daughter there at Cuba. It's heartbreaking to see what a desperation and what a misery these people were in. So that is all the fault of Marxist Leninist indoctrination. It doesn't work. Marxism Leninist philosophy is a myth. It cannot bring countries, it cannot bring bacon to the table. It cannot bring prosperity. And there's ample proof in the world. All the socialist countries collapse. People kick socialism out, and now they are all market economies. But in Sri Lanka, the JVP is still insisting on Marxism and Leninism. If you ask Anura Kumara, or if you ask Sunil Handunetti, or any of those vociferous proponents of Marxism Leninism, they will stand by. They will say, Marxism Leninism is one for Sri Lanka. For 58 years, they were basically preaching this as a mantra. And when their founder, Rohana Vijayveera, when he organized the 5 classes of his political philosophy, in 5 classes to brainwash young minds and then make them killers, to brainwash them, to arm them and train them in arms and kill people for the sake of making Sri Lanka socialist. 2 times failed revolution. All those killers, the JVP members, are hailed every year as heroes. That is how this imbecility continues. So, but the people are afraid to talk, or even the media doesn't talk about these things. I think it is important for people to know the truth. So the truth of Marxist philosophy is never worked. And actually, back in 1950s, a lot of people, economic professors, everyone analyzed Marxist philosophy and told that this will not work. And even the Capital, the main book that Karl Marx started to write, he could not complete. And in that, there's a lot of contradictory things and contradictions. And it, as a economic principle, Marxism will not work, and it has been failing everywhere, in the sole socialist bloc and even in the Soviet Union. So that is the truth, and that truth JVP has to tell, and they don't tell it. And even now, we talk of IMF, they will indicate that IMF, if you talk about IMF, America is a member and it's an imperialist. And that's what happened to Cuba. In Cuba, Castro will get up on the stage and talk so much anti-imperialist, anti-American slogans, but it didn't help the country. And the country believed him, and they got lost, and then they got suffocated, and now they are trying to survive through market economy and entrepreneurship and private ownership. And in Sri Lanka, the JVP, if you go to JVP website, and in their party program, it was in black and white, they said that the socialist revolution in Sri Lanka will abolish all the private property, private ownership. and later on they put a sort of a prelude to that and then try to correct it. Now, if you look at the internet started in 1983, and since then, up to recent times, JVP had that, and now they are going to change it to just to hoodwink people. Now they are cheating, they are deception continuing, and lot of Sinhala speaking, Sinhala reading people don't understand this. I will actually do a sequel to this in Sinhala for the benefit of the people who sort of don't read or listen in English. I will do this in Sinhalese, but this is the truth. And then while living in Russia from 1970 to 83, I for one, for myself, first as an undergraduate student and then as a postgraduate student, we experienced how the system was collapsing, because it was not sustainable. By the end of 70s, like 79, 80s, in Russia, in Moscow, in the Russian Federation in Moscow, people were relying on international students to be their shopkeepers, because the students went out for their holidays to Western countries, brought things to sell to the Russian to meet the demand and the needs of the Russians. And to give an example, when we went to Russia in 1972 with a government scholarship, it was completely prohibited, strictly prohibited to sell anything. One of our students, senior students, I believe sold a tape recorder or something. KGB recorded it, and he was captured and he was expelled. So we knew this story, and we were very afraid not to sell anything. And a lot of times, many a times, Russians will approach us and ask us to sell this and that, especially when we go abroad, like to England, and come back with a nice watch, wearing nice watch, and then traveling in the train, and somebody sees it, the young Russian will see it, and they will follow us and beg us to sell it, because unfortunately they cannot buy such things. To give an example, as an engineering student, I could not get a handheld calculator in Russia, in Moscow at that time. So one of my dreams, for the first time when I went to England after my first year in 1973, was my dream was to buy a Casio calculator. I bought a 25FX Casio calculator in England with my first salary that I got working as a salad boy in a restaurant. So we all went there for holidays. That was our dream, to go to England and other countries, and that was the truth. And also to give an example how the Marxist Leninist economic principles stagnate countries and suffocate countries, I'll tell you another example. The film rolls, 35mm film rolls that you use for still cameras. Those days when we went there, I was surprised and stunned to see that you can only buy the film roll wrapped separately. The celluloid of the film roll is wrapped separately in a brown paper. If you go to the shop, the camera shop, to buy the reel, you can buy that reel separately, and then there's a box, black box with two socks from both sides. So you put your hand in with the celluloid roll in one hand, and then the other hand, and you feel the bottom of the box. You can see empty cassettes and covers and caps. So what you do is you unwrap in the dark the celluloid roll, and you have to wind it onto the cassette, the reel, and then put the cover and the cap and then take it out. That's how we did it. And this is in the Soviet Union, where they send the first man to the space. But the problem is the Marxist-Leninist indoctrination and inebriation is such, people get tunnel visioned, and they don't see these things. And of course there's a lot of corruption and selling and buying and all these things, and a lot of students actually did studies part-time, went abroad to buy things and sell, and they used the opportunity. And our hostel where I used to live, in Moscow. It was a common scene during after the holidays that most Russians will come in taxis and suitcases full of clothes and this and that, and even musical instruments and everything they buy from the students. And there was a time that nobody actually cared, and nobody was punished, because people were in dire need of their day-to-day things. And a pair of jeans was sold at could be bought at for about 300 rubles, and that 300 rubles is half of the salary that as a student I earn at a student working camp in Siberia. Now, student working camp is one of the projects that in Russia we took part as foreign students, which is, I think, is a good experience, good scheme. What happened is the Russian Communist Party young members, students who study with us in the same course and stuff like that, they organize a brigade. In that brigade, about 10 or 12 Russian students will get together and organize a brigade and invite international students, foreign students, to volunteer to join. So we volunteered. I want to get the experience. I went there twice. I took part in the student working camps twice. And so what they do is, the Russians do is, they sign a contract with a usually the student brigades will go to Siberia because there's a big project was going at that time. Baikal Amur Magistral, they call it, with the Baikal Amur rail highway, and Baikal Lake, joining the Baikal Lake and the Amur River. So it's a big project. I think it's about 4,000 kilometers long stretch of rail, and we actually work in that project, and the Russian students will go and sign a contract with the provisional councils of the that area to do different things. In the first instance, when I went, we stayed in railway railway compartments, and we actually built railway lines. The secondary railway line we built from scratch. Right, the metals. The blue metal will be put by trucks, and then our job is to take sleeper by sleeper and spread them, and then to bring the rails up onto the sleepers and then hammer them down. So we did all that. I mean, it's very hard work, but I have written about all these things in my ebook, which is called Shindig in Moscow. Now, Shindig, as you know, is like a party of history. Yes, from outside it looks like a party, but in Russia it was not a party. It was actually a suffocating system, and people hated. And if you talk to Polish or Polish person or somebody from other republic, when you come to know very close and very trustworthy, if you become if you win their trust, they open their heart, and they hated the Soviet system. Even my academic supervisors, of course, they are very close to the Communist Party. They are kingpins in the communist organization, because otherwise they can't be big academics. But when we talk heart to heart, after I became a PhD student and very close to my supervisor, I went to his, they have a secondary, like a second house in away from the city, which is called dacha. So he invited me for that to dacha for a dinner, and when we had a drink and had a chat, heart to heart chat, and I realized how desperate and how miserable these academics are, because they are basically, their science and progress of their science has been politicized. So they have to be basically begging or having some connections to the Communist Party kingpins to get favors, to get their science moving. So my supervisor was a very big scientist, in the field of machine tools and machine theory of machining. And he, for our PhD, we wanted, at that time it was a big invention, in the world, the fiber optics. So he managed to get concentric two sets of concentric fiber optics for our PhD project through a secretive Communist Party military lab for our project. And how he could do that is through his party connections. So in order to even do your science and degrees and everything, not only that, even for my PhD, everybody who's doing a PhD, who at that time did a PhD in Russia, had to do a thesis on philosophy. So no matter which specialty, so my specialty was engineering, I had to do a thesis, and that thesis I had to somehow link to Marxism. And I didn't know how to, but my supervisor helped me, and he actually gave me the number of the pages for me to refer and then copy to the thesis. It was a book by Friedrich Engels, nothing to do with Marxism, but Friedrich Engels wrote a book called Dialectics of Nature, and from there I actually, because my PhD was connected with modeling, so I could actually get the pages that my supervisor indicated. I could copy. At that time there was no internet or the word processing or anything like that. So anyway, so that's how I did. And then also another thing I would like to say, how Marxism-Leninism suffocated the progress of science, development of science. I'll give you one example. This is what happened if JVP had their way in Sri Lanka. I'll tell you one thing. In Russia, when we were doing when I was doing my thesis in cutting tool, my supervisor and I came up with it's a patentable, innovative device, which is a cutter which allows to change the pitch or the distance between the cutting edges. The cutter has 12 cutting edges, and then we work it out because the unequal blade spacing in the cutter will suppress vibration. So we were investigating how to suppress vibration in a machining process called space milling. So in short, that was our project. So first we did the analog computer simulations, and then we want to do the real thing. So in order to do the real thing, we my supervisor and I came up with this innovative design, and nobody had it at that time. So somehow or other I made contact with the world's leading, this is all to some extent secretively with a Swedish company, Sandvik Government in Sweden, and I went to Stockholm and met a guy from that company, and they were very interested in our thesis, my research work, and they wanted to collaborate. So the first initial discussions will happen, and then my supervisor was very supportive. Unfortunately, under the Marxist-Leninist principles of Soviet Union, you are not allowed to do collaboration in the scientific area, and especially in the innovative, patentable areas, with imperialist, capitalist countries. So Sweden is a capitalist country, and officially we could not do any collaboration. So I used to write letters to the person, but we knew that some of the letters are not getting through, so I actually asked for help from a friend, Indian friend, and he's actually had a relative in the Indian embassy. So through that diplomatic mail, I used to get the communication done, right? And then I found somebody from Sri Lankan embassy as well. But anyway, to cut a long story short, it was that difficult. And then it didn't work through. But finally, it's so sad that I went to Stockholm, had a chat, And then they realized how strict Russia was at that time. And he actually presented me with a model of the cutter they were already manufacturing. They only manufactured, the company only manufactured fixed pitch cutter. They could not change the pitch, the pitch or the distance of the cutter, the cutting blades. In our design, it is easy to change. It's variable. You can change it. So that's why they like it, and they wanted to actually try it in their factories and do some product development. However, he actually presented me a plastic model, engineering plastic model, I think made out of Teflon or something, a model of this their product. It's called T-Max. So the T-Max cutter, and I was very happy. I thought, okay, I'll go and present this to my boss, supervisor, and he gave me another one for my boss, but another different cutter for my boss. But anyway, at Brest is the border checkpoint between Poland and Belarus or Russia at that time. And at Brest, they saw this. They treated it as is like a dangerous device. He didn't allow. I almost begged, and they would not allow. And in front of my eyes, that model was thrown into a bin. And that much stupidity and imbecility ingrained in their brains, thanks to Marxist Leninist upbringing and the indoctrination. This is what happened to a lot of things. I mean, for one, I have followed the 5 classes of JVP before I left Sri Lanka for higher studies, and a little bit of affinity or liking is somewhere in the brain. And with that, I went to Cuba, and I expected some good things to see there. Now, I was completely disappointed. And my wife doesn't like to even to mention Cuba, because it was heartbreaking. It was heartbreaking to see how people struggle. They don't have water. This is in Havana, Cuba, capital of Cuba. I think 2 million people live there. There's 11 million people. 2 million people live there, and they have organize and bribe the water supply people, and the water supply is by a private company, a Spanish company, and it's all falling apart. The buildings are falling apart, everything. But anyway, for water supply, the Cuban people have, what do you call, the Cubans in Havana have been very inventive. What they have done is they have bribed the company and put additional taps onto this little small inspection holes and opening holes in the water lines. And what they do is, in the middle of the night, like 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock in the night, most of the houses have a little pump and like a water hose. They attach to this, and then they pump into, plastic barrels, blue barrels, where usually the chemicals come in them. So they buy these little barrels, and they've found somewhere, and sometimes 2-3 barrels in an upper high place in their house, and fill them up, and that is what their supply of water for the rest of the day, for cooking and bathing and whatever. So this is the desperation. But having said that, in 2000, about 1 million people were sacked from their government jobs, Cubans, and they were told, in order to safeguard the revolution, very tricky way, safeguard the revolution, we have to let you go, we can't pay your salaries. But the government gave them loans, and there was no repayment period, no interest. But the catch is, the people have to find and fend for themselves by organizing their own little business, small business in their houses. So they were allowed to hire somebody if they want, and the numbers increase. First it was 5 people, and then they increase up to 100 people, I believe. However, what you can see if you go to Cuba now is every house in Havana, in the front veranda or in the front area, some people have little shoe shops, shoe repairing shops. Some people have little sewing machines and stitching and making clothes and pillowcases and whatever. Some people do something like pillowcase, that pillow lace, that in Sri Lanka they do, like a similar thing, making bed sheets and all that, and they sell it, and they are so desperate to earn some money. And some people run little restaurants. So in their own kitchen, in the house, not equipped for a commercial cooking, but they somehow do it, and then they serve. It's heartbreaking to see. And these people, lovely people, musical people, and the Cuban music is actually very good. It's all, make you dance and beat and everything. But unfortunately, that is the truth. And people like Anura Kumara and his vociferous, all these propagandists don't say the truth. They don't say the truth. This is the truth. What they do is, the JV people see where they go. They visit France, Germany, England, Canada, and all those countries, capitalist countries, which they don't approve the principles, the private ownership and so-called exploitation and all that. But why don't they go to Cuba? They never go. Why don't they go to North Korea, for an example, to meet with Kim Jong-un? Now, they know even every one of JVP former so-called revolutionists or the Politburo or members, where they are now. Even the former leader of the JVP was in England, living in England. Why go to England? If socialism is so good, why don't they show people, the socialist countries, what they have achieved? They cannot show anything because they know themselves this is a myth. With socialism, you can't improve countries. It is a disaster. And JVP should be truthful. And I will do a sequel in Sinhala, and I want to make sure that people find the truth and the truth only. And unfortunately, with all the internet and everything, people don't see or read this. And we have to put the blame on journalists. When they interview Aruna Kumar or somebody, they don't ask the right questions. Why don't they ask just one question? They can say, okay, comrade Anura, you believe in socialism. Now, the fundamentals of socialism is the dictatorship of proletariat. Can you please explain how can you achieve this dictatorship of proletariat through parliamentary democracy? So your fight to win the win power, the parliamentary power itself is not a itself is not a fraud. You're tricking people. So why don't you tell the truth, or something like that? Maybe not in that blunt terms, but maybe politely and tricky way. Maybe you can ask them. Nobody asked that question, right? And then the other thing is, what is their Marxist Leninist answer to the given economic problem in Sri Lanka? They have none. They don't know, because it is out of their reach. They are only, fantasizing this. They are only like, the childish, infantile mentality, brainwashed, and want to brainwash others. And this is the truth. And anybody can challenge what I said and can go and check situation in Cuba. There are ample videos on YouTube, people who publish, and I have a lot of videos myself I took, but I don't want to beat my own drum. But I was even appalled to see Che Guevara's statue. I mean, Che Guevara is a big icon in Cuba. Che Guevara's own statue, it was when it was planted on a little plinth, and they must have put tar or something like that, and it's all melted and all seeping down, very ugly. and they don't have money to maintain that statue even. So it's pathetic. So this is the truth. And people don't, they somehow struggling with different things, and I think they keep them going and save from their desperation and depression through music and their somewhat jovial attitude to life, even if their stomachs are empty. They try to find some ways to make some music, because music is in their blood and DNA. Maybe that helped them, but it's very unfortunate and very pathetic and very heartbreaking to see. So this is what the truth of Marxism-Leninism, which has been proven around the world. Except for JVP, this is the truth. Thank you.